Okay, thanks, Linda. I'd like to welcome everybody to Growing Concerns for May the 30th. I want to touch on quite a few things today regarding the crops update. We want to talk about some of the weather issues we've been having, some of the nutrient issues that are showing up in some of the crops. Some producers are starting to do some spraying of in-crop right now, so we're starting to see some issues regarding tank mixing and crop tolerance issues. So I figured we'd go through a few things regarding that, and maybe just a little bit of an update on tank mixing as well. And then as the winter wheat starts to get close to spraying for fungicides for fusarium and some of the leaf diseases, I figured maybe a staging for fungicide application. And then we have Carol Graham on, and she's going to be talking regarding some of the issues we're seeing in some of the trees and just diagnosing some of the different problems and getting to determine what we need to do for, or what if there's some control measures we could do to for some of those. So with that, I guess I'll get into the cropping issues, and this is what we've seen on May the 21st in the Rossburn Shoal Lake area. So this past week, I guess it was, we had a good dump of snowfall and pretty much made the ground white. I think there was reports of up to 3 inches of snow in most areas. So the ground was definitely white. This is actually a field of canola, and the canola was coming up already, and so there were some anxious moments for some of the producers in the area, but luckily enough we didn't get temperatures dropping below zero those days. There was definitely some concerns. Here's a wheat field not too far from that area as well. And then just some pictures of the canola. And I guess with that, we've had a couple of days over the last couple of days, I guess, have been some concerns for frost. And last night, I guess, was probably the closest we've come to having some major frost in some areas. Did get some reports this morning of -1 to -4 in some areas. So I would imagine we're going to have some calls coming in this coming week, or by the rest of the week here, from producers regarding their canola and whether it's been damaged or not. I guess the first thing I'll say about that is that we need time. The crop needs to get growing to see if there's been any damage. Right now, my opinion would be that the damage, if any, would be limited to some areas in the field, but it wouldn't be too severe. What we'll need to be watching for is the growing point, and the growing point of the canola, you'll be seeing new leaves come out of the cotyledons. And if we still see new leaves growing, that would be the key to say that those plants are going to make it. So even though some of these plants may start to yellow or start to look a purplish color, we still could see a lot of those plants surviving. So I guess the big take-home message there is we're just going to have to wait and see in those areas that did experience some frost last night, that we'll probably need to the weekend before we can make any type of determination if some of those plants are going to be affected by the frost. One thing, the weather is forecasted to be good from now on. They're talking 20 and 24-degree days. And the good thing about that is if we're going to see new growth, that'll happen fairly fast, and that will help us in making the decision. I wanted to share with you some of the information that we can get through the MAFRI website, and this is just I guess a chart or of temperatures and rain we've received to date, growing degree days, corn heat units, and just from different locations where they have weather stations. So this is available on the MAFRI website. So if you're interested in keeping up-to-date information as to, from your area, as to how much rainfall you received to date, and your percentage of normal, it's actually some really good information. And when you look on the rainfall side, most of the Southwest is receiving adequate to above average rainfall, which if we got some heat, we would definitely see these crops bounce and get going. So I guess that's just some information that's I guess available to us. It doesn't update really quick, but you know, there's still no information as to last night's frost on it and the areas reporting. But like I did say, we had areas reporting anywhere from -1 to -4. And leave the weather part of the crops update and get into I guess something that we're going to really need to watch for when we get this warm weather showing up. We've had a lot of canola that's been growing very slowly because of the cool, wet conditions. A lot of canola that's been in the ground for a fairly long period of time already, and a lot of the insecticide has worn off. So I think producers are going to have to really keep an eye on their canola, make sure that you know, we don't get a lot of flea beetle damage showing up. They're definitely going to be active once the weather warms up here. We have a lot of canola sown on a lot of black soil because of it was unseeded last year and then worked. So because of that, we can and probably will see a lot of flea beetle activity. There has been some reports of producers spraying for flea beetles, and I have had a couple reports of producers having to reseed because of flea beetles. So I guess just a reminder to keep an eye on them. There are economic thresholds and things to look for when you are checking your field. Here's a picture of undamaged canola. Here's a picture of damaged canola. One thing you have to remember with the insecticides that come with the seed, the flea beetles will need to actually take a bite of the leaf to actually ingest the insecticide. So you will see feeding. I guess that the biggest thing is to determine the amount of feeding before you need to, I guess, react with some type of insecticide. Chart on the bottom here kind of helps you, you know, look and see what kind of damage you would need to see before you would go out and start spraying. And when you look at the right-hand side here and you see 25% defoliation, there is quite a bit of feeding. And when you get to this point here, that's where you would need to determine if you need to go out and spray. One thing to monitor is where they're feeding, and you know, in the past, a lot of times we would see the headlands of the fields would be where we would see the majority of the damage. With a lot of the fields being black this year, I would think that, you know, it could be throughout the whole field, so we need to be kind of checking the whole field instead of just the headlands. So when you're going out there to check, make sure you're checking the entire field and not just your headlands. And if the headlands look okay, there might be hot spots in the center of the field. Next thing I wanted to talk about is spraying under adverse conditions. We've had some pretty rough weather this last little while here with the rain and winds and cool temperatures, and we're getting a lot of producers that were trying to do some spraying or catch up on some of the fields that they were falling behind on, and getting lots of calls regarding, you know, can I spray, should I be spraying, which I should be doing, and just a general guideline. Most chemicals need temperatures, you know, at least that 8 degrees Celsius to and usually less than 27 degrees Celsius. So there's that range where, you know, they'll work fairly reasonable in. But if you start dipping below or above those ranges, then you can start running into probably the biggest thing is crop tolerance issues. And that's probably one of the things we've been seeing quite a bit of in the last week here with some producers spraying in the cool temperatures. And because of that, we're seeing some crop yellowing and issues like that. The other thing, it seems that we're adding more and more stuff to the tank when we're going out there to spray, and when you're spraying in adverse weather conditions and you're adding fungicides and fertilizers, you have to remember that they usually heat up the control of the product, not mainly because they're, I guess, adding to the way the chemical works, but they're working as another type of adjuvant or a sticker, and because of that, you just get the chemical, the more of the chemical actually sticking to the plant, and because of that, it takes more of the plant's time or more of the plant's energy to break that chemical down, and we could see some damage happening that way. Most of the time, the plants will be growing through these problems, but a lot of times it looks a lot worse than it is when you first start seeing some of those crops yellowing. Here's just a picture of one of the fields I was in this past week, and you can see the yellowing of the leaves. It's usually the older leaves because they would be the ones that were there when you sprayed, and they were showing yellowing symptoms. But when you see new growth coming, new leaves poking through the tillers, new leaves coming on the main stem, in a few days with heat, a crop like this would definitely start greening back. I guess the big question after that is, is there yield loss? And it's really hard to determine that at this time of year. But if we get good growing conditions from now till fall, probably the effects will be limited. And just another picture of that same field, and just the yellowing of the leaves. When you look at it close like this, it doesn't look too bad, but when you look at it across the field, you definitely see yellowing, and across the whole field, a general yellowing from the dark green color that it was. I guess one of the other things I've been getting calls on this past week here is we're having some issues with some of the winter wheat crop that's out there, and what we're seeing is some general yellowing in places. We're seeing areas showing up, whether they be low spots in the field or high spots in the field. And this is a field that I was in last week, and you can see where there was a definite line between kind of where it's deficient and where it isn't. And so what we're finding is we're seeing that a lot of these areas where the yellowing is they're short, in most cases, short nitrogen, and in some cases short phosphate as well. Now, some cases have become fairly severe, and trying to rectify the problem is going to be difficult. So in those cases, we're seeing maybe the producers doing something else besides trying to remedy the problem. And in this case, this producer was probably going to be looking at destroying the field. But there has been other fields, and here's a picture of one of the fields I was in this week, and you can see the yellowing of the leaf. When you pull these plants out of the ground and take a look at the root system, and I didn't get a good picture of the roots, but what we are seeing is a fairly well-developed root system, but not a very deep root system. And in most of the fields that we're seeing some of the symptoms, a lot of the nutrients were put on last fall when the producer was planting the crop. So we're wondering if maybe the nitrogen is there, it's just lower down and the roots haven't got to it yet. So maybe some hot, dry weather here would cause those roots to go a little farther down, and they would capture some of that nitrogen. This is that same field, and it's really hard to picture, but if you can see down in these areas here, it's just the plants were a little bit shorter, then they're yellower, and there was a great crop of winter wheat coming. It still is a great crop of winter wheat. It just there's some yellowing starting to show up in some of the areas. And when you get this much growth, you can see where if it's trying to source most of its nitrogen or nutrients in that top 2 to 3 inches, where it seems the roots are most abundant, you can see where it might be running short. So for some of these guys, they're looking at doing some top dressing, and just to get it get it through this this short period of time here, and then hopefully the roots will get down to the nutrients where it needs to continue growing. This is some of the something else we were noticing as well, and when you look at nitrogen, which is fairly mobile, you can see that the older leaves of the winter wheat plants were definitely yellowing, and younger leaves, or the upper leaves, are green. So basically the plant is moving nitrogen from the older leaves to the newer leaves. So we're seeing some of that die back as well, and that's probably causing helping to show the yellowing in the field, because you're getting a fair bit of browning and dying back of some of those leaves. So again, just a kind of a little bit of a close-up as to what we're seeing out in the field. With that, and just a couple slides here on plant analysis, because it seems like now that the crops are growing, in order to, I guess, find out or if you're going to be seeing issues out in your field, we can determine what if we are short some nutrients, and just kind of a couple slides here on the proper way of taking a plant sample to bring in to send away to get the lab work done. If you're sampling a crop like wheat or winter wheat, like the ones I've been showing, if it's in the seedling stage, tillering stage, you cut off the plant about a ½ inch above the ground and sample about 50 plants. If you're getting into the heading stage, you want the top leaf or the flag leaf, and again sample about 50 plants. So not heading, about an inch above the ground, and heading, you want the flag leaf and everything above. And that's for grains and grasses. If you're working with beans, first to third trifoliate, cut the plant an inch above the soil surface and send the entire plant. Early bloom stage, to pod set, submit the first fully developed trifoliate leaf from top, and go from there. With canola, if it's the seedling to a rosette stage, you collect the entire plant above the ground, and if you've got pod development already, collect the fifth leaf from the top without PDO from about 30 different plants. So a little bit more involved there. You need to start doing some counting, but if you look at your main stem and then you count down 5 leaves, that would be your best one for canola. Corn, and again, just varying depending on the staging. Right now we'd be in that 4 to 2 inches or 20 inches tall range right now, so cut the stalk off about a ½ inch above the ground, and then later on you just have to, all these would probably, if you're going to be looking at sending them to a lab, most of the labs will have a written procedure as to how they want them and how they want them submitted as well. Whether they want them in paper bags, that's usually the way they want them. They usually don't make them in plastic bags. So just other things, but it would be good if you're looking at a problem in your field and you want to do a tissue sample to determine what's going on, just to find out which lab it's going to go to, and then each lab will probably have its own criteria. But this information here is fairly general. And here's just the sunflower. So again, we'd be looking at 2 inches above the ground right now, but again, the sunflowers are just nicely starting to come up, so we're not seeing too many issues there yet. With that, I'm going to jump into some of the fungicide stuff that I've been dealing with over the last couple of weeks here. Our last week here, we're getting producers that are seeing winter wheat getting to that stage where they're going to be applying for leaf disease. A lot of them are, the head is in the upper boot already. Flag leaf is there. So just wanted to go through a little bit of the staging, and and just so our producers know that what timing would be best for control of certain diseases. One thing that I always emphasize with producers is knowing what flowering is, because most of the time when producers go out into the field and if they see the white anthers showing up on the head, they say that the wheat is starting to flower. And usually when you're seeing these anthers on the leaf, the wheat is done flowering, the blooms have closed, and the flowers are getting ready to drop off. Flowering usually occurs from the center and up, and then goes up and down. So if you're seeing this already and just starting to see it, then your timing is pretty much right on for application. If you're seeing the whole head showing these anthers, you're probably past the point for control for fusarium. For controlling for fusarium, we want to get it right in the flowering stage. And so basically you don't want to see, anthers showing up on the head when you're going out there. If you're seeing anthers, your time is definitely going to be limited, that's for sure, for getting control. But with your application, you're also, looking at getting control of the leaf diseases, because most of the products that you'll be spraying for fusarium will also be controlling the leaf diseases as well. This slide here just to show you where the head is already. So the flag leaf is out. You can see that the awns are starting to poke through, and the head is in the upper boot already. So we're talking within the next week here, we'll be seeing a lot of the winter wheat starting to come out, depending on the weather conditions when it does come out. If it's hot, a lot of times the plants don't flower for a very long period, anywhere from 2 days to probably a maximum of a week, but probably if it's hot, less than right around the 2-day period. So your window for application is going to be small. This is just the zodiac scale for wheat and for I guess for most cereals. And when you look at it, basically you're looking at the time when for the winter wheat, this is the stage we're in right now, head in the boot. When you're looking at application time period, you're probably looking at this stage right in here, head in the boot to head half emerged. That's probably your ideal time. The problem we run into a lot of times is when we have crop that's uneven, or our tillers are farther behind, and when we've got heads starting to come out, and then we've got tillers where the heads aren't going to be out for a couple days, or in some cases a week even. So that's where we have to go out there and make a judgment call as to what would be the best time to spray. I usually say that what you're really trying to do is you're trying to reduce the amount of disease on the main stem and the first tiller, because those are the ones that usually give you the majority of your yield. When you get into the the second, third tillers, a lot of times those heads are smaller and they don't produce as much as the main head. So that'd be kind of just something to look for, I guess, when you're going out in the field. And staging wise, I think with heavier seeding rates we can reduce the amount of issue is out there, because we don't get as many tillers showing up, and then we get it kind of evening, more even ripening or staging out in the field. I threw this in just to kind of let you, I guess, see what happens if you do lose leaves to disease, what percentage or potential yield loss there might be. And when I was talking about the boot stage to flowering stage, the critical time for that plant to have its leaf material to help the head develop, when it's in the boot stage, and if you remove the flag leaf, you could experience up to 20% yield loss. If you remove the 2 top leaves, up to 32% yield loss. So very important at that stage of when you're out in the field to be checking to make sure that those leaves are clean. if they're showing disease and you've got half the leaf gone, basically these percentages are half, but that's still a fairly major percentage of loss of yield. So that's why timing is important when you're going out to spray. When you look at the flowering stage and after, basically the percentages of yield drop as the plant matures. So again, just timing critical for on the winter wheat anyways, from now until for the next couple of weeks anyways. And there's just a picture of Fusarium and the tan spot and septoria that we're looking for the leaf control. So Fusarium, we're looking for the heading time and the flowering time. That's the critical time to control the disease. And then when we're spraying for this, we're going to automatically get this type of control. So the concern I said about the leaf, and once you start losing leaves, and by losing leaf, it doesn't mean the leaf is gone, but when you get enough disease showing up and you only got, like in this case, if you lost a third of the leaf, then it's a third of that percentage is what could be lost in yield. And I guess with that, I'm going to end my talk regarding the crops update, and I will turn it over to Carol, and we'll get Carol to give us an update on some of the tree issues and some of the disease issues we're seeing in trees right now. So Linda, is there any questions, or can we turn it over to Carol?
Not at this time, Lionel. There's no questions. So.
Okay, you want to turn it over to Carol then?
Sure, I can do that. Just one second here. Okay, Carol, go ahead.
Hi, Linda. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm just kind of going to go through some of the more prevalent, problems that we've seen as a result of some of the conditions the trees have been exposed to over the last couple of years. Some of the problems we see in trees can be as a result of environmental conditions or stresses they've been exposed to 2 years prior. So sometimes it makes it a little bit more problematic to pinpoint exactly what the problem is and what was the original cause. But we know we've had two, in the case of growing seasons for the trees, as far as they're concerned, two cool, wet growing seasons. Particularly last year was obviously problematic, and we're starting to see the impact of the high water levels that we saw. We're seeing poor leaf development in quite a few of the deciduous trees, a lot of the poplar, and I've noticed a lot of ash as well, or slow for leaf development. And so as a result, one of the things that we see trees do is in reaction to a stress is we see that they will flush out following in the subsequent growing season. And the first thing they do is they produce a pretty prolific seed crop. And then at that point, once the seeds have developed, then the trees start to peter out. They try to flush out a little bit, and then there's just not enough reserve left in the trees. There's probably root damage, and so as a result, you see the leaves start to curl and die. And this is a shelter belt. It's got a mix of trees. There's some maple, and the ones that are browning are appears to be predominantly Siberian elm that have been kind of showing this symptom. And what they've done, as you can see here, is there's a very abundant seed crop produced. They did a little bit of flesh out in terms of the leaf, but there's just not enough life in them to keep them going, and so now we're seeing that the trees are kind of succumbing to the high water table that they were exposed to last summer. One of the biggest problems that has been developing this year is with regards to the spruce trees. It's most common in the Colorado or blue spruce, but it's also being observed in the white spruce as well, and that is the Rhizosphere needle cast. It's identified. Typically what you've probably seen if you have spruce trees is that you've noticed needles probably last summer into the fall and maybe even through the course of the winter kind of turn brick red, as some of these at the lower portion of the tree have done. That's the diagnostics, is that the lower branches are usually the first to turn red, and you get that characteristic red coloration of the tree. And so you probably notice that through the course of the winter, and then what happens is now you're starting to see those needles are dropping. And that's the diagnostics of needle cast. That's what it does, is the needles themselves drop off the tree, and then you obviously start to see the appearance of bare branches. And typically what this disease does is it starts at the base of the tree, so sometimes you just see the bottom branches dying off and you think that's just a natural kind of a self-shading process, that the trees are just kind of sacrificing their lower limbs. And then you'll see in subsequent years 1 or 2 branches slowly start to develop those same symptoms, and it slowly creeps up through the canopy of the tree. And ultimately what happens is you start to see trees where the lower branches eventually succumb to the disease. They're no longer able to produce new growth, and you start to see this form developing. So in this tree, the bottom branches are obviously done. They're no longer able to produce needles, but the disease is up in the mid canopy, and you can see that there's no needles in the interior portion of the tree, but it's still able to flush out new growth every year. So if your trees are at this stage and you're starting to see bud development and production of new growth, then you still have the option to treat the trees or treat for this disease. And fortunately, it's one of the few diseases where you can treat to kind of get ahead and try to save some of the trees here. Again, this is just a outline where this is the area that if your trees are at this stage in terms of symptoms, then you have the option to treat. There's obviously fungicides that you can apply, and this is the time of year where you would start to consider applying your fungicides. You want to wait until the new growth is about 2 to 3 centimeters fleshed out, and you do an application at this time of year, and then you're going to want to wait another 10 to 14 days and do a second application. And you got two options. You have the chlorophenol. There's 2 commercial products, the Daconil and the Bravo, and then there's the copper oxychloride. And again, there's commercial products with that active ingredient in there as well. So if you can do those applications, you're going to at least, you're not going to get the portions of the tree where they've dropped the needles to come back, but those areas that are still fleshing out new growth, you're going to protect that new growth and maintain the aesthetics of your tree. One of the trees I've noticed that has been struggling with leaf development this year is the ash. This is, again, because we've kind of we've had a warm spell and then we entered into a cool spell, and so the tree's kind of shut down, and it's a little bit of a reaction on this particular species. But what is potentially at risk here is ash anthracnose, and that's where eventually, once the leaves fully flesh out, I anticipate that we're going to start to see the leaves themselves start to brown and curl, as you see up here. And when that starts to happen in your trees, the trees start to develop a little bit of a discoloration, and they start to develop this appearance that they're thin. The crown is kind of thin. And we've seen this for a couple of years in the bur oak as well, which is not as obvious, but I think with subsequent years and infection, you're going to start to notice that they're going to have a thinner appearance in their crown. For the most part, it's not something you need to kind of rush out and treat right away. It's always in the atmosphere, and it's one of those things where once the conditions are right, you see more and more problems. The trees are able to take the infection for subsequent years before they succumb to it, and it has to be pretty severe infections. So if you're starting to see leaf development and browning, I wouldn't panic this year, kind of let it run its course. If we enter into a dry spell, as we did last summer, it'll set the disease back a bit, and then you probably won't see as much of it in the atmosphere coming next year. But if you do have trees that you're concerned about, you've noticed it's been taking a hit for the last 2-3 years, and it's just starting to kind of show its signs of decline. There are products with mancozeb that you can consider to apply and set back the disease. And again, this is the time of year where you start applying those fungicides, because again, they're starting to become active and starting to produce the spores. There's been areas I've noticed where there's a lot of willow declining, and this is attributed to willow blight. Last year you'd notice the leaves probably dropped off earlier than normal, and then this year this is how your willows are starting to appear. The lower portions of the trees are not producing any new growth, and it's just kind of restricted to the upper portions of the tree. This is the result of two things happening. We call it willow blight to kind of blanket the two problems that are in the willow right now. One is called the black canker, and it appears as though when you look at your tree that it had suffered from winter kill. You see the blackening of the branches themselves. That blackening will kind of migrate its way along the new growth, and then once you get a little bit of heat and the leaves are exposed to higher temperatures, then you start to see blackening of the leaves themselves. And eventually that's what's dropping early. You see them probably towards the end of July, leaves dropping, and that's as a result of the canker. There's not much you can do about this one. Once it gets into the wood, you can, depending on the size of your tree and how many you have, you could opt out to do a pruning measure as a control measure, but it's a very difficult one to kind of get ahead of. And the other one that's in the willow is willow scab. I don't have a picture of the willow itself with the scab, but the diagnostics of it is that you develop this shepherd's hook, and you see this in poplar, which is obviously related to the willow, and they kind of get this curved branch formation, and then the leaves blacken and drop off as well. Again, there's not much you can do for control with these. It becomes problematic within the stem, and then you're going to see the tree is no longer got the capabilities of moving water from the roots and up into the upper canopy. This is hypoxylon canker, and this is poplar or aspen. We see it's quite aggressive in the native bluffs of trees, and it is always been there, but it has over the last 2 to 3 years become more obvious and a little bit more of a concern, because we're starting to see it hit the younger trees. This is typically a disease that will hit your older trees because they've been exposed to some kind of environmental stress. Things like even a hailstorm or an ice storm will create entry wounds for this disease, and then you start to see the decaying of the wood and eventually collapsing of the stand. But we're starting to see smaller trees being impacted by it, which is a little bit out of its character. And we're also seeing cankers developing in the poplar, and that's just basically these elongated wounds. There's several different cankers that can impact poplar, but you'll start to see this scarring or elongated wound development in the tree. Problematic for your native bluffs because obviously you're starting to see them collapsing, and if you're using them for pasture, then they become, the productivity and obstacles become more problematic for the livestock. But what we're also seeing is it's starting to move into the shelter belts, and we're seeing more diseases hitting the poplar in some of these fairly recently established shelter belts. This one is about an 8-year-old shelter belt, and these are hybrid poplar clones. The beauty of these trees is that they're adapted so that they flush out immediately in the spring as soon as the temperatures allow for it, and they grow until the absolute longest they can go into the fall. And so what happens is, because they want to do that, that's how we're seeing, or why you see a lot more growth in these types of trees versus our native trees. The risk they run into is they're exposed to the frosts, both in the early part of the growing season and later part of the growing season, and it sets them back, and those frost stresses them out, and then they become more prone to some of the other diseases we're seeing in surrounding areas. And so as a result, we're seeing fairly young shelter belts succumbing to various cankers and impacting their ability to leaf out. And again, because they become hidden, or because these cankers hit the stems, they typically hit the main stem in the lower part of the trunk. There's really not much you can do, because it's at that point where water flow is disrupted, and it eventually just kind of chokes out the tree. So there's not many options you have when you start to see those problems in your hybrid poplar shelter belts. In terms of insects, there hasn't been really much insect activity as of yet, so there's not much to really comment on what is a problem at this stage. Usually once things start to warm up, it's usually around mid-June, you start to see damage caused by various insects. But I thought I would raise your attention to a couple of them that were problematic in some regions last year, and because of the mild winter, I anticipate we'll see some activity of the same insects again this year. One of them was spruce budworm. For those of you may have noticed in late July, early August, this moth kind of fluttering around. It's very nondescript, but if you saw them hanging around your spruce trees at that time of year, then it's a very good chance you're going to have spruce budworm again this year. And what the moths do is they've laid their eggs, and they're going to start to hatch here very shortly once the new growth is fleshed out and there's something for the larvae to feed on. And they're going to hatch out the eggs. I have a picture here, and you're going to start to see the larvae feeding on the new growth. This picture gives it a little bit of a perception that you might actually be able to tell they're obvious once they're in and amongst the needles, but actually they're not that obvious when they're just starting to feed. The only time you really recognize that you have budworm is once you start to see this level of damage. So they've already started to feed on the needles. You can see these are the needles they fed on, and they brown up and then start to collapse. You see here they've defoliated the previous year's growth. And another identifying feature is you start to see this webbing in and amongst your new growth, and that's an indication that you've had spruce budworm in and amongst your trees. So I would keep an eye out for them starting in the next couple of weeks, and just kind of look at the new growth and watch to see if you're seeing any defoliation or any tips browning. This is over here. Your first indication is you got the very tips of the needle start to brown up. And it's at that time you'll want to start considering some control measures if you have a severe outbreak. Spruce budworm is something that will hit trees year in, or for subsequent years, and it's usually not until the third or fourth year that the tree has had to battle with the insect that it starts to become an issue for the tree, and you start to see it show its stress and decline. But if it's just your first year, possibly your second year, and you haven't seen any real severe damage, it's not really an issue to panic. However, because the trees are dealing with the fungus or the fungi that's in the atmosphere right now, and particularly the needle cast, it may be something you want to stay on top of just to remove that additional stress. And the other one is spider mites. And spider mites is a little bit trickier to identify because initially it looks like you have a fungus. It can be, originally you'll think it's needle cast and you'll treat just for that. And then all of a sudden you'll start to notice come mid-June into July kind of some of this insect damage, and that at that point it's too late to really, you potentially have maybe even applied a fungicide thinking that's what you have, and then in the meantime the insect's done its damage. And so what you're looking for is once the same thing as spruce budworm, once the new growth is fleshed out, that's when the mites are active, and they start to feed on not necessarily the newest growth, but look at the previous years. You can see here this is the most recent growth, and you can see the damage is in behind there, and they'll kind of hit that portion of your tree. and cause some stresses. Eventually what they'll do is they'll move into the new growth, and then you'll see bud damage and deformity at the tips of the branches. And then at that point, you've got mites. And again, because of the other stresses the trees have been exposed to over the last couple of years, you may want to be on top of that and kind of watch for that to make sure it doesn't cause more problems for your trees. And I think as far as that, that's all I really wanted to raise in terms of the tree problems that we're noticing as of the last couple of months.
Carol, I do have a question here. They're
Okay.
asking, in regards to needle cast, should dead lower branches be trimmed off and disposed of? And does fertilization help?
You can prune out the dead branches, but it would be more for aesthetics than anything. The disease itself stays in the needles. So if you're concerned about spread, really one of the recommended options to consider is to actually try to clean up the needles that have been dropped, because they're harboring the fungus. And so if you're trying to minimize spread, that would be one option. But in terms of pruning, it's not effective for the disease itself. It's just more for the sake of protecting your tree. Fertilizer, it helps the tree in terms of it maintains its vigor, and it'll allow it to produce more new, or a healthier flush of new needles. The downside is the more needles you have, if you're not controlling the disease, that's just that much more of an opportunity for the disease to come back into the tree. Because what you're going to do is, if you're applying a fungicide at this time of year, what you're doing is you're not addressing the fungus itself and the infected needles. What you're trying to do is protect the needles that haven't been infected yet this year, and trying to maintain their ability to stay intact on the tree. So if you have a fertilizer, it alleviates the stresses, but it doesn't ensure that you're going to actually give it an advantage to fighting the disease itself.
Great. Thanks, Carol. That's all the questions I have right now, Lionel. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I do have another one. What are the differences between needle cast and spruce stigmina?
Stigmina?
Yes, could be, yeah.
Okay. Needle cast is, they're very similar in terms of symptoms. So you're going to see the interior of the tree turn red. The difference is with needle cast, at this time of year, you should have seen your needles starting to drop, if not dropped already. And with stigmina, it's a blight. So it's a fungus that's impacting the trees. But the difference is they'll hold on to those dead needles, so you don't see them casting the needle. So if you have trees where they are still holding on to red needles, then there's a good chance you've got stigmina, which is, for last year, was actually diagnosed in several trees in certain parts of the province. So it definitely will be something to see again this year.
Okay, and can anything be done with black knot in the chokecherry trees?
No. You can prune them out, and that's your only real control measure, is to prune it out. But it is one of those things where it's in every natural bluff of trees there is that holds chokecherry. So it's just prolific throughout the whole atmosphere, and so it becomes quite problematic to control. It's more of an aesthetics issue. If you are growing chokecherry for fruit production, you may want to be pruning it out, because subsequent years of black knot will reduce fruit productivity, but really it's more of just an aesthetics than an actual performance issue for the tree.
Would you use the same control for spruce trichomina as needle cast?
Yes, you can actually. Yep, it'll be very similar. Same fungicide, same principle, and same application. So you'll be looking at, once the new growth is fleshed out about 1 inch to 2 inches, then you're going to want to put in the first application, and then again a second application. And the principle is the same. You're trying to protect the new growth.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that I have right now. Thanks.
Okay.
Lionel, are you there?
Yeah, I was just waiting for you to give my screen back to me. Okay, well, thanks, Carol. That was good. So what we're going to do now is, I mentioned at the start that I was wanting to just quickly go through some tank mixing orders or tank mix orders for when you're getting, I guess, your chemical ready for going out to the field. I've been getting some calls regarding some of there's so many new chemicals that have come out in the last year and a half here that a lot of producers are starting to get a little bit confused as to, is there been changes? Do I need to be, how concerned do I need to be? What should I be doing? And I guess the first thing is you should always be checking the label and following the label instructions. But there is some standard instructions that we have in the Guide to Chemical Weed Control, and I'm going to just go through those instructions there. And then again, if you are using a chemical that's fairly new or something that you haven't used before, definitely read the instructions on the label or contact your dealer. A lot of times contacting your dealer or contacting some of your ag people, they're dealing with a lot of the questions on a daily basis, and they'll be a lot easier sometimes than reading the label instructions. So I guess step one is, you always want to make sure there's start with some water in the sprayer tank. You don't want to just start putting chemical in alone. So anywhere from a quarter to 3/4 of a tank of water, and then start your agitation. So this way, once you're putting the product in, it's being mixed with the water that's already in the tank. One of the things with some of the new sprayers out there, a lot of this product is being put in so fast that sometimes we lose track, and we tend to just start putting things in box at a time. Or what the best thing to do is, before you get ready for putting it in, open up the cases and divide out the products, because sometimes you'll have a liquid and a dry portion to each product, or a combination of different things. And if you break them out into what you need for that fill and have them, and then put them in as in groups, it'll make it easier if you're prepared before you start. So once you got the water in, the next thing you do is you add any of your fertilizer or pH adjusters into the tank. So that would be the first thing you would do from your package. So in the example here, we have a CERT, and the CERT comes with a pH adjuster in the box. So that would be one thing that you would be adding first to the water, would be your pH adjuster. And if you are adding fertilizers, like a lot of producers are right now, you'll be putting fertilizer in before any of the other products. Step 3, any of your wettable powders, so any of your dry products that would be that you want to get into a liquid suspension, you would want to put them in next, and make sure the sprayer is agitating, and make sure that you're getting all the product into the tank. If you're using a mix and fill, then make sure that it's cleaned out well, and all the product has gone in through the system before you start putting any other products in. And sometimes after you put that product in, it's not a bad idea just to let it agitate for 5–10 minutes, just to make sure that everything that's gone through the system is in the tank and had the opportunity to get into a liquid form. Sometimes it does, especially if you're using some products for the first time. Sometimes it doesn't even hurt to, after you have put it into through the system just to go on top of the tank and take a look in from the top, and just to make sure that you've got or you see that the product isn't floating around in there and not being dissolved. Next would be if you're putting in any of your liquid would be the next step, but before you put it in, a lot of time the recommendation is to make sure you shake those containers because a lot of them will have product that might settle to the bottom. Some of them are more thicker product, and because of that they tend to it's more of a settling, and because of that if you give them a good shake before you dump them in, then you'll do well that way. If you're running a mixed and fill, just make sure you rinse the container out good with the water, and most producers are doing that now, where they'll have a mix and fill where they'll may pressure or washing the containers out with high pressure water, so that they're getting most of the product anyways. Then you add those chemicals to the tank, like I had said, and then basically you would start with your amines and then go to your esters. And then step 7, you'd be adding any of your surfactants or adjuvants. A lot of the times, and I put the comment in there again, is to make sure you read your label, or consult a label when you're using a product, especially something new. There are a lot of new products that have come out lately that are combinations of products we've used before, and because of that, it's important to read the label to make sure you're getting the right mix. Also, I kind of emphasize it in more than talking to where you're picking up the product. Those guys have constant contact with the dealers, with the chemical people, and have been trained as to how the product should be used. So they'll have good information for you as to how you should be putting the product into your tank, and then also how long you can let it sit in the tank in case you run into a situation where we've had in the last couple of days here where guys have been having products sit because of the weather. There's always exceptions, and just put one in here for an example. When you're tank mixing Liberty and Centurion, you add the adjuvant first, and normally you would, when we went through the steps, normally your adjuvant would have been added last, and in this case you put it in first, and mainly because it's a mixing thing, and if you were to do it the opposite, you would get just not a very good liquid suspension. There would be some lumps or some clogging, and you could run into a lot of nozzle problems. So again, just an example of one that doesn't follow the rule, and that's again another reason why you should be checking with your dealer or your label. Make sure you're reading your label before you go ahead and start putting product in. The reason I wanted to mention the tank mixing orders is we had a couple issues this past week where producers were using some products that were fairly new and ran into a couple issues. And you got to remember that the products, when we're mixing now, we're mixing for 100 acres or 80 acres, and with the cost of the product, it gets very expensive. It can be a very expensive mistake for something that would have taken a phone call or just some time to read the label. But so again, just to make sure you know the order and follow the instructions. Just a couple things to remember: that some of the pesticides, if left in the tank for a long period of time, tend to break down a bit. So agitation and also just knowing how long you can leave something before you may start losing control if you use that product. So make sure you're up on that. Try to mix again, which you can spray at one time. So don't try to mix up a whole bunch and then get caught in a weather situation where you can't finish. And again, agitating if you had to leave the sprayer for any period of time. and that keeps the products in the tank mixed well. And with that, we're getting close to 10 o'clock, so if there's any questions, Linda?
Not at this time, Lionel.
Okay. If there are no questions, I'd like to thank Carol again for being on the webinar, and again, here's our contact information for the Cirrus office and for the rest of the Southwest and South Parkland.